Mary Toft, and her maiden name was Denier. She was born in 1703, and I've also seen 1701. So, you
okay, yeah. Well, then, there wasn't a lot of documentation.
Married Joshua Toft at age 17, and he was 18. So they're both very young. And at this time, the average age of marriage was about 23, 24 for their class.
Okay.
So she was young.
They were young.
Yes. Their first child, named Anne, was born on March 27th of 1723, who then died in July. And then their son James was born the following July. So a year later, they had another baby. Mary was described in one of the many articles written about her from the time.
Right.
As small in size, fair of complexion, having a healthy, strong constitution, and a very stupid and sullen temper. And she was illiterate.
Oh,
obviously, because she's a very stupid and sullen. I was like, well,
she's sad and she's dumb.
Nice,
great. That's nice.
Like a stupid and sullen. Nice.
That's real nice. Thanks for that.
Yes.
They at least call her pretty.
She's fair of complexion.
Does that mean good? Is that good?
She was healthy and strong, so she's working in the field. So she's probably a sturdy girl,
right?
But she's young. She's
not bright.
Of the working class, so she's used to a daily work. So she's probably on the thin side,
right,
and muscular,
right.
So what people now would probably think is attractive,
right?
I guess that she was at one point she was pregnant again with her third child.
Okay.
And her and there was a total of 3 women working in the field, and all of them were pregnant. And while they were laboring in the fields, they came across some rabbits that they chased. They couldn't catch them. And Mary stated later that after the rabbit encounter, her thoughts were constantly on the rabbits and how she longed for the rabbits. She kept thinking about the rabbits, and she couldn't stop thinking about these rabbits, right? And sometime, months later, while she was working at the hop ground, which is the hop garden where she was getting paid to pick hops and weed hops, she had a miscarriage. While at work, she started to have a miscarriage. And she had to walk home a quarter of a mile, and she said it took her 2 hours to walk a quarter of a mile because she had to keep stopping because of having a miscarriage. Isn't that horrible?
That's horrifying.
Horrible.
That's
She's
the worst thing I've ever heard.
And all the other women that worked with her covered for her so she could go home and not get docked pay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah. It was not.
That makes me sick.
It does. It's not a good time to live for, especially being a female, a poor female at that. 5 or 6 weeks later, we're talking, this is about September. She's about 23 at this time, 23, 24. She passed another substance, and quotation marks here, with her mother-in-law, whose name was Anne Toft, present, and was given a pot into which she delivered the animal parts out of her body.
What?
Yes. And a group of local women were there and shown the contents of the pot, which they sent to a local doctor by the name of John Howard.
I'm horrified.
Yes. She delivered more parts before the doctor returned, and was accompanied by female relatives and neighbors throughout this whole affair. So all the while this is happening, she's at her home, and she's surrounded by women. She's surrounded by her family, her mother-in-law, her sister-in-law, her husband, and all the local women from the area, because that's what they did.
Right.
They would come and help if you were, cause she just had a miscarriage a few weeks before this. And now they're like, oh my gosh, she's still getting rid of things.
Right.
And no, these are animal parts.
I'm horrified by this.
You should be horrified by this, because it's horrifying.
I do not like this.
No. And John Howard was based out of Guildford and was a wealthy landowner. He owned about 5 properties. He had 3 children. He wrote a series of letters to persons of distinction in town, London, which they mean, which got him in contact with Dr. Nathaniel St. Andre, who was the surgeon and anatomist to His Majesty King George I. Mm-mm. And so he sent him letters talking of this miraculous thing happening with this woman. He needs to come and see it, you know? And at the time, he's preserving all the things coming out of this woman.
Oh.
Yes. And it was said that she gave birth to 9 dead rabbits in one day. And parts. Not just whole rabbits, but parts of rabbits.
Oh, my God.
Yes. So he traveled, this is Saint Andre, traveled into Surrey from London to observe for himself.
Yeah, because you're like, well, no, I don't believe this.
Yep. At this time, Dr. Howard had delivered 8 rabbits for Mary Toft. This is around November 6th is when this happened. By the time Saint Andre arrived, Howard was about to deliver number 15.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yeah. At this point, they had moved Mary into a room above Howard's house. Like after he got there and he sees she's delivering rabbits.
Right.
He ends up moving her into a room in the upstairs of his house so he could better observe her.
Right.
After Saint Andre got there, she delivered a rabbit torso, skinned, but with heart and lungs intact. And Saint Andre estimated it to be about 4 months grown. This rabbit.
4-month-old rabbit came out of her.
Just the first,
just
the torso.
Torso with a heart and lungs and no skin.
And no skin.
Yep.
Yes. So a few hours later, the lower half was delivered, and its reproductive organs and bowels were still intact. And later that evening, after short, intense labor pains, she delivered a rabbit's head, fur intact. This one had its fur on it. So, yeah, this is like...
I don't even know what to think.
It's like she keeps delivering
I cannot
rabbits.
even process this information at all.
No.
It's horrifying.
It is. It definitely is. A few days later, we're up to November 20th at this point.
Oh my God. She's still delivering.
Yes, Cyriacus Ehlers arrived in Guildford and was shown by Mary's nurse, one of the many women around her, a piece of rabbit skin, in quotation marks, this is how they described it, very fresh, like the skin of a wild rabbit just stripped.
Ew.
Is how they described this, that she birthed out of herself. He wondered how a rabbit could be skinned while in the womb and was told by the man midwife, because they use that term a lot in this book, midwife, Howard, it was a result of the violent pressure of the uterus against the pelvic bone.
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
It's perfect.
That's why babies come out skinned. No, they don't.
He was not convinced.
I'm with him.
He actually took a bunch, he preserved a bunch of the specimens. And he brought them back to London and tested them, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Coming forth another doctor from London.
Yeah, because they're all like, I need to see this bitch.
Richard Manningham. He arrived on November 28th and witnessed the birth, in parentheses, of a small piece of organ that looked like part of a bladder of a pig, which he put in his pocketbook to display in London later.
Oh my goodness.
He just like popped it in his little satchel.
Right.
That's going to smell good
later,
buddy.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. A note to make here. At this time in history, superstition and the supernatural were plausible alongside of science. So people were starting to do experimentation and dissection and exploring of things as much as they could.
Right.
But they still believed in the supernatural and how that could affect different things.
Your body, yeah.
Right. In the process of conception and gestation, because you couldn't see it through your body.
Right.
They were still shrouded in mystery, so they didn't know a lot about
how it all
what happened inside the mother. The only time that they could discover that is if a woman died and they illegally opened her up,
right? Which
they couldn't do. At this
they weren't
point.
allowed to do.
No,
autopsies.
It was illegal to cut, like to dissect a human. It was like not.
Oh, against God.
It was
probably.
Yes. You could get in big trouble for that. The theory of maternal imagination, because this is something that they talk about a lot at the time, maternal imagination. What a woman saw or felt during pregnancy could pass through her senses and make a literal impression on her mind and be physically imprinted on the fetus.
Yeah, because that makes perfect sense.
Yes, doesn't it?
Let's not cut a person open, but we'll believe this.
And we're going back, because I don't know if you remember, like, anybody who listened to my last Toxic or Terrible Trend episode, and we talked about Pliny the Elder.
Yeah.
We have him to thank for a lot of this nonsense, because him and there was a couple other they thought a woman's imagination could produce a monstrous birth way back in ancient, like, things that you think can affect
your birth.
Your baby.
So if you're thinking about rabbits, you're going to give birth.
Or if you have a overly sexualized, you could deliver a monster if you're thinking about sexual things while you're pregnant.
Oh my God.
And it could affect, like, there's a physician named Daniel Turner. He wrote a book called De Morbis Cutaneous. It's a treatise of diseases incident to the skin. He wrote this in 1714. Okay. So this is before Mary.
Right.
Where he explained that marks on baby's skin were a direct result of the mother's imagination during her pregnancy.
So like birthmarks, freckles, anything.
Because of your overly indulgent imagination gave that kid a birthmark. Yes. An enlarged second edition of this book was reprinted in 1723. And then a third edition was also printed in 1726, which is the year of Mary. All this is happening. A man named John Mowbray is a London midwife. He's a man midwife, published a book called The Female Physician, containing all the diseases incident to that sex in virgins, wives, and widows. This was printed in 1724.
Oh.
Yes. There's a quote, "I very well know that when the soul is elevated and inflamed with a fervent imagination, it may not only affect its own proper body, but also that of another," meaning a baby. So keep your imaginations in check, baby, if you're pregnant, because it'll affect it.
Your child will come out a monster.
A monstrous
birthmarked monster.
Or a bunny rabbit.
A rabbit.
Because this girl was thinking about rabbits, and that's why she's giving birth to rabbits.
I thought about tuna fish a lot. And I wasn't eating. I was a vegetarian then. I thought about tuna fish a lot.
I did too.
Surprise, Griffin wasn't a tuna when he was born.
You're having a fish. Oh, anyway. The men who came to see Mary, like St. Andres, Ehlers, and Manningham, they all wrote pamphlets. It was like a pamphlet war going on in London. Because all of these doctors are all coming and observing her and examining her.
Right, they want to be the first
They're all writing
theories.
pamphlets about it because they're going to make money selling these pamphlets, right? About her and her rabbit births. And the first one printed was by St. Andre. And again, this is His Majesty's physician and anatomist, right? On November 29th. And it was announced in the newspapers on December 1st, 1726. So he printed it on November 29th, and the newspapers got a hold of it and on December 1st. And it was titled, "A Short Narration of an Extraordinary Delivery of Rabbits." And you can actually find this still.
Oh, you can Google that?
And you can find it and read it. Like, this book that I read, she got all of her information from all these different pamphlets that were written by all of these doctors, and then by the testimony of Mary that's like in the court, because they took meticulous notes. Like, people that went to court, they took notes about that. You can find all this stuff.
I bet it's hard to read though, because it's written in such a different way.
And a lot of the fonts, like the S, the print looks like a F.
Oh,
because it's
the way
it's weird. It's just like the typing. I'm like, I'll just read hers.
I can't.
That gives me a headache, right? Manningham wrote a book called An Exact Diary of What Was Observed During a Close Attendance Upon Mary Toft. And Ehlers' book was called Some Observations Concerning the Woman of Godlyman. And these were both printed on December 8th. And I'm just going to say that St. Andres was first, and it was November 29th. But her fraud was exposed on the 5th and 6th of December.
Okay.
So, like, his came out before the fraud was.
Okay.
So his was all like, this is amazing, and blah, blah, blah. But these other two men, theirs came out after. So theirs was like, oh, we knew it was a fraud the whole time.
We
so
knew
it was like, they were late to the game, but it was probably good for them.
Yes, because it made them look like they knew what they're talking about.
Right.
Even though they probably believed it true.
St. Andres printing stated his first-hand accounts. So Mary Toft was under almost constant observation between her women, nurses, and St. Andre himself. He even mentioned that her vagina was blood-free and intact following a delivery. So, like, he noticed things that should have keyed him in that it wasn't real.